Old man can't figure out technology type of guy, I guess. Shaking my fist. 3, 2, 1. A second pro day for Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence without an Indy check. It is the Audible Live. What does that mean for their draft stock, and why is 2 pro days now a thing? We're going to get to all that and more, of course. Cecil Lammey, author of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, Matt Waldman, and the great Dr. Gene Bramwell. Fellas, good evening. And Dr. Gene, let's start with Trevor Lawrence. Indy recheck's going on, and he's not going to be there. He's getting married. And he has a non-throwing shoulder injury that he's recovering from. What's the latest we know on number one overall pick? His name is Trevor Lawrence.
Well, the latest we know is that he's throwing, which is a good sign. That means he's progressed far enough in his rehab that they're not worried about him doing a little bit of range of motion. Probably means that he's out of the sling that you often feel. You know, you've seen folks kind of move around with those big, heavy slings that are sort of attached to their body a little bit. And so he's progressed far enough to be out of there, which you would expect him being 6 to 8 weeks after the surgery. This shouldn't have any long-term effect. In fact, it should be a good thing. These labral surgeries aren't a guarantee that players won't have any ongoing stability issues in the shoulder. But this being the non-throwing shoulder, this is to make sure that they do everything they can, Lawrence, and presumptively the Jaguars, to keep your issues, shoulder dislocations or what have you. So shouldn't be any issue. Hopefully he doesn't miss many reps during the offseason, whatever that may be this year. We're still waiting to hear how the NFL is going to approach the offseason with their training activities, but hopefully he's there as soon as possible to start getting reps with his new team.
Nice. So what about Trey Sermon with his collarbone injury? I've heard talk about the possibility that he's it might take him a little bit longer to heal fully to be game ready, though he participated in his pro day.
Do you know what type of collarbone injury he has?
All I heard is it was a broken collarbone.
Recently?
In January, back in the national championship.
That's when it was. Okay, good. Did he have surgery? Do you know? I think either way, usually those things are kind of in the 8 to 12 week range, whether it's surgical or not. There's been a trend to have surgery more recently in the last few years rather than waiting for it to heal on its own. I wouldn't expect that to be a long-term situation. If they chose not to have surgery, it was likely a stable injury that was going to heal without too much difficulty within 2 to 3 months. If it was surgical, then it was stabilized surgically and you'd expect him to heal pretty well. So I don't think that's likely to be anything that would affect this season. Shouldn't be something that would affect too much in the pro day. I guess you probably wouldn't be likely to see him lift at that point, but seeing him run drills, seeing him do some pass protection and things like that, if there's not a ton of stress being put on that, I think would be okay. But generally in season, that's a 6 to 8 week and sometimes a little bit more than that injury, depending on what the imaging studies show. So if it was an injury in the national championship game in January, then I think he'd probably be pretty go soon. That's something I'll look at in the next couple of weeks. Wrote about quarterbacks today, and running backs and the positions are going to come shortly after that. So running backs are next on the list, so I'll have a little bit more on Sermon in the days to come.
He is Dr. Gene Bramwell. Of course, check out his work at footballguys.com. And Pat Mahomes is out of his boot. I know, when we look at what he did in the Super Bowl, what he did in the playoffs mostly after sustaining that foot injury, now to be out of his boot, sounds like it's progressing as we want.
Yeah, that's the general hope with these injuries, is that they're non-weight bearing for around a month or so. Mahomes' surgery was done very soon after the Super Bowl in February, so not a surprise to see him walking around without a boot, fully weight bearing 6 weeks after the injury there. Even though he's going to be able to, you'd expect him to be cleared in time for football-related activity well in advance of training camp. This is an injury that takes a little bit longer to heal in terms of range of motion and pain control, even though they'll allow players to bear weight. So don't be surprised if through off-season activities to training camp, and then even in the beginning of next season, you hear if there's a spare report about him needing to be participating in an orthotic or something like that. That's just to sort of protect the issue, not because there's any setback or otherwise. So the fact that he's already weight-bearing suggests that I don't know that the Chiefs will clear him for off-season activities necessarily, but he'll be ready for training camp and won't have any issue for week 1.
Well, tell us a little bit about Matthew Stafford's thumb injury. Any issues there that we need to be concerned about long-term?
I don't think so. He played through the injury towards the end of last year. His surgical procedure was described as more of a cleanup than a ligament repair, which was maybe a surprise to all involved. Sometimes you don't know exactly what you're going to get into when you just with the MRI until you're there surgically. And hopefully that's what it was, that they just wanted to make sure everything was as buttoned up as possible. But the most recent reports were that it didn't have to be repaired and put back together. And he's already been cleared to throw. He's expecting to participate in OTAs, which is also a very good sign, given that he's getting into in things with new receivers and a new team. So hopefully he'll get as many reps as possible in the offseason as well.
Diego here in our chat room wants to know, is it foolhardy to expect Burrow back for week 1?
Well, I think it's foolhardy to expect that Burrow's injury will go as smoothly as all other ACL injuries go. There's a big difference between an ACL isolated ligament tear and an ACL tear that's got other injuries associated with it. And we know from multiple reports, and it looked like on video, that there was an MCL, the ligament on the inside of the knee, that had some damage. Oftentimes that's allowed to heal and scar down on its own, which is part of the reason why players with ACL and MCL injuries don't have surgery right away. And that's the case with Burrow. Burrow's ACL reconstruction happened about 3 to 4 weeks after his initial injury. Adam Schefter, however, also said that there were some other signs of damage in that knee. He wasn't specific about it. It doesn't sound like it was necessarily a ligament structural issue, but when you have an ACL and MCL injury at the same time, a lot of times your meniscus in the knee, either one of those structures can be involved as well. The good news is that Burrow has been saying from the beginning that his rehab is ahead of schedule. He said he was told by his surgeons at 6 weeks that his knee looked like it was 12 weeks into rehab already. And that's a physical recovery timetable. So I don't think that you can have the isolated 6 to 9 month expectation for Burrow that you'd have others. However, him being not necessarily a pocket quarterback, but his primary role is to throw the ball from the pocket, does not necessarily need a ton of extra time. So the questions are not only going to be physical over the shorter term here, but is he comfortable with his front plant leg in the pocket? Will he be able to maneuver? Is he going to be able at game speed to be as accurate and have the arm strength that he had before? Those are questions that are yet to be answered. So it's really important that he's making the physical strides that he is, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's ready to go. And we know the Bengals aren't going to be particularly transparent about injuries. Expect Burrow to talk about his injury quite a bit, but I don't know that we're going to know until we get a whole lot closer to July whether or not Burrow is going to start camp on the PUP list or not. You would expect that to be the case. Whether or not they put him on the active roster in time for week 1 is we got a long way to go there. So tentatively would expect, just say kind of questionable for week 1, and hope that the Bengals are ready to put him on the active roster, not necessarily in time for that second or third preseason game, but to give him enough reps in practice and team drills so that he feels comfortable for week 1.
So, Gene, is the draft media just doing its due diligence to have a story to talk about when it comes to Davis Mills' knee, the Stanford quarterback, when he had ACL surgery back in 2019 and was expected to miss much of the year, but came back, I think, early and played, and then he played in 2020 without much of a problem, but it's still a question mark? What kind of questions would you have?
It could be anything from cartilage issues to off and on swelling that he may have or otherwise. But this is a situation this year, Cecil hinted at in the beginning, there's really not a combine. There really wasn't an extensive medical check. Just today, a number of players were invited to Indianapolis for some medical checks, and Davis Mills may or may not be among them. It was kind of top 150 players and players with known medical risks. And if enough teams requested Mills to come out, maybe they're able to get a hands-on examination and look through his file a little bit more carefully and decide if there's any additional imaging studies that would be helpful to them. And I don't think we're going to know. So I don't know if Mills is going to be in that group or not. He wouldn't necessarily make the top 150, I wouldn't think. If there are enough questions, and we do hear that he was invited to Indianapolis, that probably means a couple of things. One, somebody is concerned about what's going on with his knee and the recovery there. And two, that maybe there are some teams thinking of looking at him in that top 4 or 5 round area. So probably more just due diligence and reporters and local folks who know that teams may be looking for a quarterback in the later rounds, looking into players like Mills. I'm not aware of anything specific about his knee that's a concern, but it's something we'll keep an eye on as we get closer to the draft.
Always keeping an eye on everything. It's Dr. Gene Bramwell from footballguys.com. Follow him on Twitter at Gene Bramwell and check out his work. And check me speak English at footballguys.com. Dr. Gene, always a pleasure, my friend.
Indeed. Enjoy the rest of the week, guys. Thanks.
All right.
And there we have him, Dr. Gene Bramwell, ladies and gentlemen. Cecil Lammey, Matt Waldman now talking about wide receivers mostly. But Matt, I want to get into the second pro day thing real quick with Justin Fields. Like, why? I know there was the quote unquote controversy around that we talked about last week and about the stupid commentary you got from a guy like Dan Orlovsky who didn't do any due diligence until after the damage was done. But why is this now, with Mac Jones? He wants to show that he can compete. Okay, that's fine. Mac Jones was a fringe first rounder before this like crazy frenzy of quarterbacks, right? Now, Justin Fields, we talk after that Clemson game, Matt. Everyone's saying, like, oh, is he number one now? Okay, why has he got to do a second pro day?
I think a lot of it has to do with that there were some teams going to Mac Jones pro day. John Lynch and, was one of those guys with the 49ers. He and Shanahan were at Mac Jones pro day while Justin Fields was doing his pro day. So maybe they want to show up and see one as well. And maybe that was the opportunity for the representation of Fields to say, you know what, we want to just put any shadow of doubt beyond this. And maybe this is a kind of a sense of positive PR on their end, thinking that this kind of careless behavior in the media causes damage, and they wanted to go above and beyond to prove that this wasn't something that should damage his reputation or draft stock. And so maybe that's what they're trying to do, is to be kind of preemptive, though I think it's being reactive to it.
Right.
But it could also be that could be some of that combined with the idea that there are some teams that potentially could be interested in him that went to see Mac Jones, and they wanted to be able to give them a second shot of seeing him up close.
It is the Audible, and we get to jump into wide receivers, and our dear friend Lance Zierlein has recently ranked the positions in the NFL draft, and I believe receiver was number one again. Don't quote me on that, but I know it was really high. And he's talking about, once again, here we go with receivers. Matt, I thought last year was the greatest wide receiver class we've ever seen. Before we jump into the top three, at least, and there's probably, 5 or 6 that'll be graded as first round, let's talk about the class overall. What were your overall impressions, especially compared to last year, when I feel like we did have this incredible class? The 2014 class springs to mind, last year's class. Where does this year's class rank?
I think this year's class is actually deeper than last year's class. It's not maybe if you're going to compare talent to talent, you might still say that last year and the year before had some guys that you would put above some of the guys in the top 5 to 7 or top 10. But there's 29 players in this class, 65 that I graded, that earned grades that basically were, in a year or two, they should either be starting, leading their team, or at least contributing on a productive level. And there are more players in this class that complicated, as Diego astutely noted. A lot of those players that people are gaga over are the slot players who give you that kind of potential as gadget options. And I'm not even, while I'm counting those in the mix, the fact that there's still 29 players, there's not like, 20 slot receivers like this. There's like 5 to 6 guys that make that, who add on to this whole deal. And still, so if you took those out, you're still looking at over 20 players. And that's a pretty deep class, because if you divide that by 4, which I joke is my unscientific attrition factor for injury, knuckleheadedness, and just immaturity overall, or off-field stuff, or just can't get the game because they were great athletes and not great football players, still that's like 4 or 5 receivers worth noting that could really be successful. And if you add in the other guys, those slot guys, and some of them you really should add in, you're probably looking at 7 or 8 players who can have that shot. And there's guys in this class that no one's talking about, other than, like, I've written about them. Dane Brugler's written about them. And it's guys like Jalen Camp and Jacob Harris, who are guys that probably would have been rated in many people's top 12 to 15. But now they're like pushed even further out because there's just so many good talents out there. I wouldn't be surprised. This is the class that's going to make fools out of everybody. because it's like there's going to be top players that'll hit. There's going to be top players that are going to see that you were wrong about them, and then there's going to be undrafted guys. Like there could be a guy like Connor Weddington who gets hurt all the time at Stanford, but has Doug Baldwin type game to him. You know, and you're just like, and I'm not making the comp because they both went to Stanford. He literally has Doug Baldwin type game to him. So it's like no one's really heard of him, or Jalen Camp, who's, you know, played an triple option offense. But when you watch him make catches, when they finally started throwing the ball to him, you're like, this guy's insane, you know. And if you want me to tell you more about Jalen Camp, I can do that right now. I mean, we're talking about a 6'2", 224-pound guy who runs like a low 4.4 or high 4.3 40 and leaps 40 inches vertically. And when you watch his ability to track the football, it's insane. Like I'm talking like he can track the ball over one shoulder. He's looking over one shoulder. The ball starts to arrive over to the other one and just windshield wiper over while he's, you know, working away from the quarterback and make diving catches, or post up on a guy and make one-handed catches that you say, you know who that reminds me of? Who are guys that I've seen do that before? And who are the guys? Well, on the low end, Paul Richardson, but who's made incredible catches. But on like the high end, let's see, Brandon Lloyd, Larry Fitzgerald, Calvin Johnson, Odell Beckham, and, you know, and this guy does that, and he's strong and he's fast. And it's like he just happened not to be in an offense that was suited to him until maybe a little bit later. And even then it wasn't high end. This guy's in my top, 16 players at the position, which is pretty incredible considering that his production isn't all that great.
It is the Audible Live. We're talking wide receivers, and as KGB says, something about Ja Tech. Yeah, I remember when Demarius came out, and they averaged 8 passing attempts per game. Not completions, attempts.
Yeah.
So, like, there's only so much you can show. Before we get into the top guys, quickly on Jacob Harris, because there's so much conversation. Like, people try to get cute and be like, he's my top tight end, or after Pitts, whatever. But, like, are you considering him a tight end, or are you considering him a wide receiver?
No, I think he's a wide receiver. And I think what happens here is that he's a guy who's developed gradually. And when you watch his game, he looks slow because he's thinking about everything.
So then people go, tight end.
Yeah. When he's at his pro day was insane. And what you see is moments in his tape where you're like, this is like a future starting receiver if he finally figures it out. Because he was a soccer player who walked on, played special teams, and was working behind Gabriel Davis and, Marlon Williams and a bunch of other guys who were pretty darn good. But he'd flash, and like he has great downfield skills. So, and the things that he has to work on, you're seeing flashes of it coming together. And like in 2 or 3 years, he could wind up being a very good wide receiver in the NFL.
I'm excited to talk about all of these prospects with you, Matt, and excited to get eventually to Frank Darby and Cade Johnson. That's later in the program. But let's start with those big three. And how do you split the hairs? Just an honest question. It doesn't even have to be these three. But how do you split hairs? Because everyone seems to have an opinion if Jalen Waddle or Jamar Chase or the Slim Reaper, I think you called him that. Yeah, the Slim Reaper, Devontae Smith, who's like, don't touch me, don't measure me, don't weigh me, which is very bizarre. I talked to James Palmer, my man from NFL Network, who was at both Alabama Pro Days, and he was like, yeah, Devontae's just like, I'm ready to go. He wants to go forth, and he was at the Senior Bowl, didn't participate, Matt, but he was there, right? It was like how Najee Harris was there. So let's talk about these big three and how people split hairs between those three.
Yeah, and it's one of those deals where, for fans and for fantasy players, you're always wanting rankings. And as I like to joke, rankings suck, but it's something you have to deal with anyway, because really you're looking at, it's just the same thing. It's about team need and what you think is going to apply best for that player at the end of the day, because if they're in the same tier, we're all good. And I would say that in this case, Jamal Chase is in the top tier. And then you can argue about Waddle and Devonta Smith, if you ask me, because when you look at Chase, the guy has it all. I mean, other than maybe great size, but he's average size, maybe slightly below average size at 200 pounds. Plays though like he's 210, 215 in terms of posting up on people.
Yeah, you wouldn't tell it by watching him. You wouldn't tell that's what he tips the scales at.
Exactly, and he plays physically. He's handled physical players. They'll let him. Joe Burrow would target him in situations where probably I would bet pro coaches would say, why'd you do that? Like, but because he's my top guy, and they go, well, yeah, I get that. Okay, fine. But it's like the decision may not have been the best, other than this, that he's my best player, and I got to go to him in this situation and let him make the play. And that's what Chase did. And he's technically sound. People forget how fast he is. He reminded people in his pro day. Before that, I got questions from people who are readers who are like, I just see him facing these top corners, and can he really separate like that? He's going to be able to separate against off coverage. I'm like, dude, don't even worry about it. Don't worry about it. This dude, he catches the ball, and he's like turning the corner on safeties and cornerbacks easily. Turn on Vanderbilt. Go turn on the Vanderbilt game on YouTube, and you'll see this guy and see how fast he is, and then how he just rents. I just did a video on him at the RSP site, how he rents space and in defensive backs' heads because of his technical skill and his ability with his speed, that they have to account for stuff, and he knows it, and he'll play them. He'll just totally game them, get them expecting one thing and doing the other, and then killing them both ways. So this is the most put together receiver. Waddle could be the ultimate weapon. I love Jalen Waddle. He's my number 2 guy. But the thing with him is, how are they going to use him? If they over gadget him and just say, we want to make him Mecole Hardman, which I never was a big fan of Mecole Hardman. So to me, he's nothing like Mecole Hardman in the fact that he can make contested plays. He's clutch. He's tough. He's great at the boundary. He runs terrific routes. He uses his speed technically well, and he has the best speed of any player in this draft, pretty much, you know. And the fact that he plays a lot like, say, Santana Moss going up to win a ball. And Santana Moss, when you're like a 1,500 receiver with Chad Pennington in an era where they still could roughhouse receivers, that tells you something. And so Jalen Waddle's a lot like that. Now, they could use him like Tyreek Hill, but if you don't have Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, and even a third or fourth guy like Robinson and Watkins in your lineup who can do damage and hurt you, then it may not be all as effective like that. But he's more than that type of receiver. You just want to see him land in a team that doesn't say, let's just use him as a horizontal option and an RPO guy. And if they do that well, I think this guy can wind up being everything that you would look for in the way that Tyreek Hill gets production. Maybe not on that high of a level, but enough that you're thinking, I'm getting 900, 1,100 yards and like 8 to 10 touchdowns out of this guy.
Yeah.
And that's more than enough.
I've heard some Steve Smith comparisons thrown around, Matt. What do you think about that?
I'm that's just sacrilege to me, because I am a high priest in the religion of Steve Smith Sr. That if there's a guy that I probably do motorboat, it would be I'm in the Marshawn Lynch, Steve Smith, like, you know, thing. So, but no, just because none of them. And we're going to get to Rondale Moore.
Yes, because that's another one that gets to Steve Smith. And just because they're little and tough doesn't mean you're Steve Smith, man. That was a different level.
Yeah, just go find Lawrence in Office Space where he's like, no, and he's on the couch and saying what he's saying, you know, to his buddy, his next door neighbor. That's me in response to that, because they're not. He's takes physical pounding well, but he doesn't give the physical pounding well, you know, and he doesn't have that leverage to win like that. He does have the contested catch ability that is on the level of Steve Smith, like the ability to go up and win it and take some contact and adjust for it. He's there. Rondale Moore doesn't have that, or more accurate would be Rondale Moore hasn't shown that he's had that. He hasn't had the reps to show that. He may have that, but I can't say he will if I haven't seen any evidence of him doing so. So it may be the case, and he has some issues tracking the ball that Jalen Waddle has no problems with. It's just that Jalen Waddle doesn't have that extra sensory perception of how to use leverage, that he's throwing guys around like ragdolls like Steve Smith did. Right.
And Rondale Moore has the injury history that reads like infinite jest. So gotta look out on that. We didn't get to Devonta Smith there. I'm not going to say he's Todd Pinkston. when you're that, these are the football jokes, people. When you're that skinny, dude, come on. It is It's a concern. He could be the greatest receiver ever, and I could be totally wrong. And it's not like I'm saying he's like a third-round pick or whatever. We all know he's going to go near top 10, and that speed's going to be very dangerous. And obviously what he did last year at Alabama is a very special season. But he's not very big. You get a mid on him, and you're going to throw him off his path. What did you see?
I saw that, and I did see instances where he had solutions to it against some defenders, but he's going to what his solutions were to still continue outside and try and use his hands and do some things with pacing to screw up what the defender was trying to do. Where the real answer that he's going to have to develop is take an inside track, beat the defender that way, and then stack and get outside on the man and turn the man around. He's got to learn how to do that. Is that impossible? No, it's going to be. That should be something you expect every receiver to learn how to do. So if he applies himself, that's fine. I think he's a smart guy in terms of his playability. And, certainly you can look at plenty of examples of guys who were productive, and I'd say plenty enough. I mean, Deshaun Jackson, while we talk about he gets hurt all the time, if you look at the number of successful fantasy seasons that players have put up over the past 14 years, he's among the best. And so when you start to think about it that way, because everybody's like, well, what about Julio Jones? And what about, DeAndre Hopkins? And I'm like, okay, so you can mention 5 guys out of 500 players who've probably come through in that period of time. And the fact that Deshaun Jackson's one of those small numbers is important. Same thing as, guys like, Marvin Harrison. He was certainly a smaller guy, but it's got to be fit with the right offense. And you've got to have that ability to win and have a presence in a contested moment. I think he has enough of that. But he's going to have to prove that he can run the routes and not get pinned to the boundaries so much. I think he'll do it, but how well he'll do it will dictate whether he's an all-pro and worth being that top-end first-round pick, or whether he's basically, somewhere with Calvin Ridley in the spectrum of things, and you say he could be a future number 1 for you, but you might want a bigger guy on the outside still, so that Calvin Ridley can still give you that top 15 production you like, and go from there.
As Diego says, Devontae is quantum. He only wants to be observed, not measured. I observed Kadarius Toney, and I didn't come away very impressed. What about you? And I know our buddy Mike Shoddy was battling people on Twitter because he also was like, this guy's not showing well. Again, Senior Bowl, I'm not going to take everything away from it, but when we talk first-round receivers that people are excited about, we've mentioned more. We haven't mentioned Rashad Bateman, Kadarius Toney there, and Terrace Marshall Jr., of course, as well.
Well, I like the other two more than Toney in many respects. Though I would say, well, I like one of them more than Toney, and one is like very close to Toney. Toney to me is basically Golden Tate with better hand position, which Detroit Golden Tate was a 90 catch, 100 catch receiver for 1,100 yards and was fantastic in the middle of the field. And I think he can be that. And like what you heard and what Michael said, and Chad Ryder kind of said the same thing to me when he was watching the Senior Bowl back in February, just saying, I'm not as impressed with him as that I thought. Now, watching him on tape, I was impressed with his ball tracking, which is something that is very important to me. We don't want any more Sammy Coates, so a guy he does a good job with that. He uses his hand techniques well. The biggest issue with him, and it applies to 2 areas, this one problem, is that he lets his stride get too far ahead of his body frame. So what will happen is that when he tries to make breaks on timing routes, he slips a lot, too often for a top player. Then also as a runner after the catch, he makes dynamic moves, but these moves put him in awkward positions where he might pull something, strain something, sprain it, or get hit while that happens, and then he might not be playing for a number of months, if not a year. And so that's kind of the issue with him. He has a very specific fit. So when we grade players, oftentimes players who have a very specific skill set, like Liam Neeson, they may not be, all that. They may not be all that appealing to people who are grading players on everything that a wide receiver can do. But putting him in the slot, letting him run after the catch, and getting open that way, he's dynamic, and that's pretty undeniable. I do wonder off field. I haven't seen enough. I don't know enough about his off field, but I did see a little bit like with an arrest or some issues where there was issues with guns around in a moment where he was there, and and I wonder about the maturity factor that may be associated with that. But there's plenty of 18 to 21-year-olds, as we talk about all the time, who have some sort of issue, and they figure it out and they grow up pretty quickly. So unless there's more smoke to that we just don't know about, he's a pretty good prospect.
Yeah. Okay. What about Bateman then? And of course, Marshall as well.
I love Rashad Bateman. He's my number 3 receiver in this draft. And he's kind of like Mike Davis. Last year's Mike Davis, this year's Mike Davis, back when he was at South Carolina. But the issue is a little bit more clear cut, because Rashad Bateman got COVID over the summer and he lost a ton of weight. Now, I don't know how much exactly he lost, but he was listed at 210. People say he never really played other than around 200. But the thing is that he wound up playing at about 190, and he didn't look the same. And they used him a little differently as more of like a horizontal receiver on fly sweeps and RPOs, when he was like an absolute dynamo as a vertical threat. But if you look at Kadarius, and he's kind of a similar story to the guy I'm going to comp him to, because this guy had a knee injury and ran a slow 40, and everybody was really concerned about him heading into the draft. And then Keenan Allen just blew the doors off the NFL within a few years. And there's a little bit of Keenan Allen to his game. There's a little bit of Michael Thomas to his game. There's also a little bit of Cordero Patterson to his game as a runner, not as a receiver, but as a runner. He just has great catch radius in terms of being able to win the ball contested wise, but he's great in the middle of the field where he can beat press coverage. I saw him beat Georgia Southern's 2 cornerbacks who played press coverage better than just about anybody in college football. They shut down Clemson's wide receivers over the during that same year. And during that year, we're talking about, I think it was Mike Williams and Justin Ross, and the guy who came out this last year. They shut him down. I'm like, easily, and really put a number on him. And he did a great job beating those guys, and then catching over the middle and having a knack for being able to have the toughness to concentrate and catch the ball with a safety or a linebacker in the way, and be able to make that one move and then work downhill and just be a fantastic runner. So I think you're going to see, especially after his pro day, which was impressive, and he added some of the weight back, that you're going to, that's right, T Higgins. Or T Biggins. I like that too. But but when you look at it from that perspective, I think that his capital is going to drop because of the last year and the production and the question marks about that. But I think he'll add all that weight back, and he's going to wind up looking much like the 2019 guy, which is one of the best 3 to 4 players in this class. And then I'm a big fan of Terrace Marshall too. I mean, play inside and outside, just like all the receivers that were at LSU during that national championship campaign. He's tough. And what I really liked about him was that mental toughness. Like when teams tried to play rough with him early on in games, and say like Alabama or Mississippi laid the lumber on him and he dropped the ball, he came right back, didn't let it bother him, and they kept hitting him, and he was lights out for the rest of the game. Like, to me, that tells you that this is a guy who can get focused, and he's not going to let a big time make a mistake in a big game or a big moment affect him. He'll come right back and step up, and he's versatile, big enough, fast enough, tracks the ball well. There are a lot of people, I mean, I wasn't one of them, but there are a lot of people, you'd hear them talk and they'd see him, during this whole playoff run 2 years ago, and say, he's the best of the bunch. He's better than Chase. He's better than, Jefferson. Everyone thought he was better than Jefferson, I think, for the most part. There are a lot of people that felt that way. But even if he's the third best of this lot, he's probably, he's probably better than all but maybe 8 to 9 receivers in this class, and probably the same in last year's class.
It is the Audible Live, and also everyone, we know the NFL draft is right around the corner. You want to know the skill position prospects better than anyone under the sun? Well, you buy the rookie scouting portfolio and you check out all of Matt Waldman's work at mattwaldman.com. As we move further down the draft board, we had somebody earlier in the chat room want your opinion on Amari Rodgers. I also want to pick your brain about Demetric Felton, because I saw him down at the Senior Bowl and they were trying to like force the running back thing, like, no, pass protection not there. But when obviously he lined up in the slot, you saw a different player. You saw a player that was more successful. He's not maybe as gadgety as people would want him to be, Matt. At least that's how he performed at the Senior Bowl. Again, we don't take everything away from that, but it's interesting to note with Felton how like they were trying to make him like this everything gadget, and he just wasn't performing that way as a slot. Very interesting. So let's talk about Rodgers. Let's talk about Felton here.
Yeah, I like Rodgers, and I think that he's not flashy compared to some of the other slot guys. But if you were to say to me, purely guys that are considered, to me, Rashad Bateman can play inside and outside, which makes him appealing. Terrace Marshall can play inside and outside, also equally appealing. And of course, same with Chase and Waddle, which is why all these guys are probably at the top of the board. Kadarius Toney is the first of the, you're mainly going to keep them in the slot. After that, to me, Amari Rodgers is, one of the second or third best in this range. He's steadier in that regard. He's not a dynamic runner, though, in the sense of like the two more wide receivers or Toney, because he doesn't have quite that much quick twitch to his game and creativity, but he's a smart runner. He's quick enough. And he breaks tackles. He makes people miss. He's just a little more conventional in what he does, but he's good at the catch point. You can put him outside and he's going to win some tight coverage plays for you, and he can get deep. So he gives you a little bit more in the contested catch area. And if you need him to be that horizontal, fly sweep type of guy, he can do it. I mean, he's just going to be very smart and efficient about it. And if they got that hemmed in, he'll just take what he can get, but he's not going to be the guy that will occasionally turn a hemmed in situation into a 73-yard game. That's just right. But that's fine. So I'm a big fan of him. I think that he's a player that you can look at him and say, all right, Randall Cobb at his peak, that might be his upside. And that's a pretty good peak for someone. And then who was the other guy we were going to talk about?
We're going to talk about, earlier, Felton and Amari Rodgers.
Oh, Felton. That's right. So Felton. Mm-hmm. Well, as a runner, I'll say this. Felton was a crease runner as opposed to like a guy who really understands how to be a technician at the position. And a crease runner to me is like a guy who knows algebra but needs to know calculus. And so he's still in the algebra stage of what he's doing. And so he can catch. Certainly you can see how he could get bigger. I like the quickness of his game. In that sense, he didn't have a great workout. So there are, in fact, like his RAS score that I've seen Kent Platt put out on Twitter, which, is kind of a combination of all the workout and the measurables. A guy like Trey Sermon scored a 9 out of 10, which was like 90% centile of all running backs in recent years, like over 2,200 running backs. Well, or 2,200 players. Hey, Alex. And then, you look at Felton, and he's a guy that he scored in like the 4 percentile out of 2,200 players, which is like awful. So, I'm not sold on him being anything more than a gadget right now. Maybe as a return specialist, I kind of would have rather seen him developed as a running back to see if he could figure out learn trig and learn calculus. And then you might have something there with him, because I saw little moments of promise with him, but because they saw him run some routes, I think they're probably more excited. But then I'm thinking, what do we have? Like former quarterbacks who play for the Philadelphia Eagles and then have a season in Tampa, and then we never hear from them again. That's good for him because he gets some money, gets paid, and maybe he gets an opportunity to do a little bit more, but it's nothing that we're going to get excited about as fantasy players.
It is the Audible Live, talking with the author of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. You know him, you love him. He is Matt Waldman. Also, check us out on YouTube at youtube.com/footballguystv. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so that you never miss a vid, and like, comment, share, subscribe, all of those YouTube things. Matt, I do have to run here in a little bit because I'm on the air in like 20 minutes, but so we will get more wide receiver talk in, but I cannot leave today's show and tonight's program without talking about three of my favorites. I got a little more on Shi Smith from his pro day, from James Palmer, again, of NFL Network, who was talking about how many people were talking about Shi Smith. Like, everyone should be talking about him more. But I do want to pick your brain about Frank Darby, who was the best player every day at the Senior Bowl. The day one he flashed, but we've seen that. I think it was David Ball years ago at like our first Shrine game, where it's like, okay, and then Tuesday and Wednesday doesn't do anything. Darby did it every day. He did it every day. Cade Johnson, South Dakota State, you got to support the Jackrabbits, baby. And he was like Spider-Man out there. Crazy difficult catches, sideline, 2 feet down, over the shoulder, late hands, one hand, all sorts of things. So I was really impressed by Darby, Shi Smith, Cade Johnson. Again, we'll have more wide receiver talk coming up on this show. But because I'm on the air in 15 minutes, we'll have to keep it somewhat abbreviated, Matt. But I definitely want to know about those three guys.
Well, Frank Darby's one of my favorites. I like this guy. I think he can be better than Brandon Ayuk, who was his teammate last year. I think Ayuk will maybe in the ultimate offense where he may end up having better production right now. But in terms of an all-around receiver, I think Frank Darby's better coming out than what Brandon Ayuk was.
And the 49ers had Ayuk as their number one receiver last year.
Yes.
So they got their guy. So it's custom fit.
Exactly. So Frank Darby to me is more of a universal fit as opposed to a custom fit. And when you watch him play, he's physical. He holds up well at the catch point. He tracks the ball well. He can win in the contested situations, shows some skill to be able to drop his weight and be able to get open. He's faster than you think. He certainly has the quickness that you're looking for. And when you tackle him, you got to gang tackle this guy oftentimes, and he can make you miss. So he's versatile in the way that you can use him in a variety of situations that I think with Ayuk, you kind of had a few more limitations, but the 49ers were a perfect fit for him. And I think pretty much any scout worth their salt was kind of like, this is a guy that in that offense, he was a terrific fit. I'm a Cade Johnson fan. I don't have him ranked extremely high in terms of ranking, but in terms of his score, he's in the tier of a contributor, of a player who I think has starter production in a limited role, and then, right now maybe diminishing returns beyond that point, but can develop for more. And I'm with you. Very good tracker of the football. He's tough. He has the burst to get open. He's someone that runs very well after the catch. He's a playmaker for his team, and you see that show up on a consistent basis. I think that he also has that Doug Baldwin-like vibe to him. It's just he's quicker than fast. He can win up the seams. He's someone that makes the tough grabs over the middle, and then he also has very good skills in the zones of the game. So I'm a big fan of him. I'm going to disappoint you probably with Shi Smith, because Shi Smith, to me, based on ability, like just what he should be able to do.
Yes.
Okay. Listen, he could easily be one of the top 20 prospects in this rich class if he just limited the abundance of unforced errors in his game. Like, to me, I watched just all the games I watched of him. I just was looking footwork issues, hand issues at the catch point, figuring out how to approach it, decision-making behind the line of scrimmage, the finer points of breaks, slipping, not being in a balanced position way that he should be technique-wise. So to me, I have him like way outside as a player that I'm not suggesting anybody to draft. But if you believe in him more than I do, and I wrote this in my portfolio, I said, if you believe more than I do, then you're probably going to place him in the same tier that begins with Jonathan Adams and ends with Dwayne Eskridge, which is basically a contributor who could develop into a starter. He has that athletically, he has that potential to be a good, productive slot receiver with a little bit of toughness to his game. But what I see right now is a special teams player who is going to get his shot to play and contribute. And if he does what he did at South Carolina, he's going to still be a special teams player.
He's not the sum of his parts.
No.
I think that's the best way to put it, which is weird because at the Senior Bowl, he kind of put it together. Again, it's 3 days, it's practice. And
it's South Carolina. That's what South Carolina does with all these players.
J.C. Horn talked about how he was one of the toughest receivers he ever had to cover in practice. And then he goes out on the field and he's dropping passes and slipping. So it's interesting. It's an interesting name. Obviously, with that athletic profile, he'll be undrafted probably. And then you just kind of watch. But I love those type of, Darius Fountain. And Fountain didn't have the technical problems that Smith does. But I love those type of man, if he hits.
Oh, yeah.
Could be something there.
And he's a guy that could. He's that guy that just needs to find the light switch in the dark room and then get the duct tape that he's got in one hand and make sure that he just duct tapes that sucker on. And if he does that, he'll be okay.
Okay, we got the duct tape, we got the rookie scouting portfolio, we got Matt's chalkboard behind him. We are good to go. It is the Audible Live. Again, everyone, thank you for checking out footballguys.com. Thanks for doing all those YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you never miss a vid. He's Matt Waldman. You follow him on Twitter at Matt Waldman. I'm at Cecil Lammey. The show is at the Audible, and don't forget about at Gene Bramall either. And hey, at Sigmund Bloom, we're thinking of you, buddy. You'll be back here in the saddle, I believe, next week, Matt. So
good.
There we go. He's on assignment. Yes. He's traveling. So there you go. Everyone, he's Matt. I'm Cecil. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. And as always, stay frosty.